everyone, my name is Amanda from beautifulnursing.com, and I'm so excited because today we are going to go over everything you need to know to ace the teasexam 7. First, let's go over the basics of what's even on the teasexam. So the teasexam is going to be 170 questions that you need to complete within 209 minutes. Okay, and the topics of these questions are going to be reading, mathematics, science, English, and language usage. Hey guys, and here's a little cheat sheet of the different topics that are going to be on the exam, what is included in those topics, how many questions it is, how much time you get to complete it. This is also included in my tease notes, but here is the little table right here, little cheat sheet. Alright guys, so let's go over the reading section first. Just to recap, this section is 45 questions that need to be completed in 55 minutes. So one of the first things that you might be presented with is a text passage, and then you have to answer some questions about it. So let's do an example together and what kind of questions you may get from the text passage. Here is the example. Once upon a time, there was a future nurse named Elle Woods. She wanted to go to nursing school and pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. She felt she was meant to be a nurse because she genuinely cared for others, loved watching Grey's Anatomy, and enjoyed her time volunteering at her local hospital. One of the first things they may ask is to summarize or to make a summary of the information you just read. So an example of this would be that Elle Woods wanted to go to nursing school to pursue her dream because she cares for others, watched Grey's Anatomy, and enjoyed volunteering at her local hospital. So the next thing is a little tricky. You may be asked what the main idea of this passage is, but don't get that confused with the topic of this passage. The main idea is going to be a full sentence on the most important text or the most important point that is being made, versus the topic is just a few words about the subject or what the text is about. So an example of the main idea of this passage that we just read would be that Elle feels going to nursing school to become a nurse would be a good fit for her. Versus the topic is kind of the punchline, and it would be Elle's dream of becoming a nurse. It also be asked, what are the supporting details? These are the little arguments that will back up that main idea. So the main idea is, again, Elle feels that becoming a nurse is a good fit for her. Why is it a good fit? Well, the supporting details say that she cares for others, she loves volunteering at her local hospital, and watching Grey's Anatomy. Let's talk about a few other terms you need to know for the reading section. One is paraphrasing, so that is just rephrasing something you already said. So an example of this would be, you look like the 4th of July. It makes me want a hot dog real bad. Instead, to paraphrase, you can do, I want a hot dog so bad because you look like the 4th of July. Okay, the next term you should know is interference or implication. This is a piece of information that is implied but not written outright. So an example would be that Elle was president of her sorority, and last year she was homecoming queen, meaning that we can infer that Elle was popular. That was not me in high school. Next keyword to know is a theme. This is an idea, an issue, or a question raised by the text. Okay, so an example from the passage that we read before, the theme of this text passage could be determination, because Elle really wants to go to nursing school because of, ABC. So let's go over the types of text you might see. So one is directions. These follow a list of steps that need to be completed in a certain order, very commonly in a recipe. Example here, recipe to become a nurse. The next is an announcement. This is a notice for some kind of request, service, or event. So example would be like a lost pet, a local issue that's going on in the neighborhood, or a yard sale. Next is a memo. Usually this is seen in a workplace setting. So there is a plan of action, a request for information, or a response to a request. And next is a legend, a key, or a map. So these will define symbols usually used on a map for various landmarks. Next, there's ads. This is selling goods. There's a description of the product, the price, and contact information for buying said product. So then let's go over the different tones of the author. So there's fact versus opinion. A fact can be proved or disproved versus an opinion. This is the author's personal thoughts or feelings. So the next one is bias versus stereotype. So a bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another. Example would be like interviewing two equal candidates, but hiring one person with brown hair over somebody with blonde hair just because of, their hair color, versus that they both are equally capable of doing the job, same education, same skills. You get the picture. That is a bias. Versus a stereotype is like a bias, yet it applies to a whole group or place. Like brown hair people are smart. Okay. All right, let's talk about the different types of text structure. So first you make it a problem solution. This is a text that will present with a problem followed by a solution, and you could get multiple solutions with the problem, so make sure you carefully pick the one that best fixes the problem. Next type of text you might get is comparative. This is comparing and contrasting information. So comparing is describing how two things are alike, versus contrasting is comparing how two things are different. So an example of this with comparing is that Elle and Janice both have a dog, versus contrasting is that Elle has a small dog while Janice has a big dog. The next text structure is a cause and effect. The text will present an action first, then describe the effects that result. An example will be, beautiful nursing hospital hired 500 more nurses in the last few months. Due to the increase in nursing staff, there's been a higher percentage of satisfied nursing staff and positive patient outcomes. Woohoo! Next is a descriptive passage. This is going to be ways to describe events, ideas, or people. Example would be, Elle was nervous to take her teasexam. She was nervously pacing around the room. Now, important things to also know in a descriptive passage are these parts right here. First is a noun. A noun is a person, a place, or a thing. So example would be Elle Woods. The next is an adjective. This describes a noun or a pronoun. So an example would be nervous. An adverb describes a verb, adjective, or another adverb, and it often ends in ly. So example in this one is nervously. Next is a narrative passage. This is to entertain. It tells a story that can be fiction or nonfiction with similes and metaphors. So similes use like. Coffee is like tea since they both have caffeine. A metaphor is comparing two things by saying one word to mean another. So Elle's hair was the sun. Her hair was not literally the sun, but it was bright blonde, it was bright yellow like the sun. Then there's personification. This is seen in a lot of narrative passages. This is non-human items that are portrayed as human. Example would be, her shoes were tired from walking home from the restaurant. Next is an expository passage. These types of passages are to teach. It informs and enlightens readers, usually nonfiction works that include phrases like first, next, therefore. An example of this would be like a textbook. The next is a technical passage. This is just like how it sounds. So this is going to be describing complex objects or processes. So usually something that's related to the medical or technology field. Next is informative passage. This is to inform, writing that explains an event, a concept, or ideas using facts and figures. An example would be a research paper, a report, how-to news articles. Those are an example of informative passages. And finally, there's a persuasive passage. This is to persuade, or meaning they want to change the mind of the readers and lead them to agree with the author or influence the reader a certain way. So this usually will appeal to emotion. It can be based on opinion. Example of this would be editorials, essays, or book movie reviews. Next in the reading section, you're going to need to know how to decode text. So let's go over a couple examples. First is the denotative meaning of text. I just remember the D's. Denotative dictionary. So this is going to be the literal meaning of a word found in the dictionary. For example, the dictionary defines knockout as the act of being knocked out in a boxing tournament. Versus the connotative meaning is something that goes beyond the literal meaning to include emotional reaction that a word may invoke. An example would be, my best friend was looking like a knockout in his new scrubs. So knockout is not used in the literal meaning found in the dictionary, it's meaning something else. In this case, it is used to mean attractive or impressive in reference to what he is wearing. So a prediction is a guess of what will happen next in the story. So an example would be, Nancy started to hurry home since she heard thunder and dark clouds were forming. Now, we can predict that rain is probably coming. If you're hearing the thunder and there's dark clouds above you, usually that means rain is coming. Next is foreshadowing. So this is hints in a narrative that anticipates something is going to happen to the audience. So an example would be, Nancy was walking home in a dark alley and saw a dark figure approach her as she rounded the corner. This is foreshadowing that something bad is probably going to happen to Nancy, and this is when I would close my book. And the next is drawing conclusions. So this is a conclusion that you piece together. The pieces may include phrases like likely, may, can, will, often. So an example would be, Nancy was walking home in the pouring rain and saw a cab. Now, we can probably conclude that Nancy probably called out the cab to take her home because of the pouring rain. This is an example of the drawing conclusions. And then finally, there's counter arguments. So this is objections or flaws in the argument that can be pointed out. All right, and let's go over the parts of this paper here. So as you can see up here, this is the heading. This is the topic that will be addressed. There is the subheadings. These are the smaller sections. And then there's the endnotes. These are listed at the end of paragraphs and chapters of a document. And then there's a footnote. So this is text at the bottom of a page with facts and figures of where certain information was obtained. So something really important you should know how to do for the reading section is finding important text. One is words that are bolded. So bolding makes something important. Example would be, the nurse washed her hands thoroughly before cleaning the wound. So next are italics. These are used to emphasize important words, phrases, and sentences in a text. An example would be, the nursing student was reading Brenner's Medical Surgical for the exam. And then underlining. So this is used again for emphasis or beneath titles of published books or magazines. A registered nurse created the book, The Nursing School Antidote, which is a collection of nursing school cheat sheets for visual learners. That's me. Okay. Now let's go over the types of sources. I know I had a couple questions on this, so let's go over them. First is a primary source. So this information comes directly from the source being studied. So this is something like letters from them, poems, speeches, audio recordings, or an autobiography. Think auto, self. This is a personal account from oneself about the person. So the person would be writing their own book about themselves. A secondary source is a review or observations made by others. An example of secondary sources would be newspaper opinion pieces, blogs, or biographies. Biographies are written by other people talking about someone's life. Then there's internet sources. An example would be credible websites from libraries, universities, or government organizations like the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, or World Health Organization. This is very important for the T's. You're also going to need to know this for when you're in nursing school, is that when you select journal articles or works from the internet, you need to make sure that they are published by experts in the field, and they are the most updated or current information. So usually we consider that anything less than 5 years. A dictionary is going to be that alphabetical list of words and their definition. An almanac is published annually, and it gives facts on various topics. An encyclopedia is a set of books that contain short articles about various topics from animals to presidents. And these volumes are usually arranged in alphabetical order. So when I think of encyclopedias, I think of when I've heard back in the day when there were people that would go door to door selling encyclopedias, and it was awkward because you couldn't just buy one volume. Usually you had to buy the whole set. On top of that, it was really expensive. And then an atlas is a book of maps. Then there's a thesaurus. This is a book of words with their synonyms, so words with similar meanings, and antonyms, words with opposite meanings. So synonym for love is going to be fondness, infatuated, liking, devotion, versus an antonym for love, which is the opposite, is going to be hate, loathe, or detest. And then finally in the reading section, let's go over how you organize information. So first is spatial organization. This lets the readers see information fixed in space. So it is used commonly to describe a place. Example would be, on the left, there is a clock in the room. Below the clock is a blue couch. We're seeing it in space where it is. This is spatial organization. Versus chronological organization. This is the most common, places information in a sequence with which it occurs. So this is used for step-by-step processes. An example is steps to eat a cake. 1, you drive or walk to the grocery store. 2, you find and purchase said cake. And then 3, you eat said cake. And you feel no guilt because said cake was all in your dreams. There's logical organization. This is presenting information in a logical sense. The types below are illustrations used to support thesis. Definitions say what something is or not. Dividing, classifying, separating by similarities in information, comparing, contrasting, highlighting the similarities or differences between information. Cause and effect, understanding the relationship between an event and what happened after. And then problem and solution, which is receiving a problem and a potential solution. All right, guys, let's go over one of my favorite sections, the mathematics section. This is going to compose of 38 questions you need to complete in 57 minutes, and you will be provided an on-screen calculator like this one here. Also get to use a piece of scratch paper for this section. So let's go over some basic terms that you need to know. One is integer. This is any positive or negative whole number, including 0. So this would not include fractions, which are going to be like a half, decimals, which are 0.5, or a mixed number like 9 3/4. A prime number is any whole number greater than 1 that can be divided evenly by 1 in itself. So an example would be 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. A composite number is any whole number that is not a prime number. So an example would be an 8. An even number is a number that can be divided by 2. Examples are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Versus an odd number which cannot be divided by 2. So an example would be 3, 5, 7, 9. Then there are rational numbers versus irrational numbers. So a rational number is a number which includes integers, decimals, and fractions. It can be a ratio of 2 integers. So an example of a rational number is going to be like 1.5. Irrational numbers, these are numbers that cannot be written as fractions or decimals since their decimal place runs on with no pattern. So an example is like pi, which is 3.14159. You know, it just keeps going on and on. So the mathematics section could also test you on the place number. So an example could be this 25,634 and 98, right? So the 2 is the 10,000s, the 5 is the thousands, the 6 is the hundredths, the 3 is the tens, the 4 is the ones. And then after the decimal, the 9 would revert back to the tenths place, and the 8 would be the hundredths place. You're gonna have to know how to do basic math like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Another thing you need to know is fractions. So fractions have a numerator on top and a denominator on the bottom. There are two different types of fractions. There's a proper fraction where the denominator is greater than the numerator, so the value would be less than 1. For an example would be like 1/2. Versus an improper fraction, whereas the numerator is greater than the denominator, so the value comes out to more than 1. So whether you're doing addition, multiplication, subtraction, or division, you always want to use PEMDAS. Okay, this is a way that you can make sure that you are adding and using the right things first so you get the right answer. So just remember PEMDAS, that stands for P, perform operation inside parentheses first. E is the exponent, so you want to simplify those exponents. Like 5 squared equals 5 times 5, which equals 25. MD is multiply and divide from left to right. And then AS is add and subtract from left to right. This is a huge hack for people like me that just do not like working with fractions, right? I avoided using all fractions on the T's. What I would do is that I would get the questions, and I would just turn them all into numbers. And then when you would get your answers, because usually if they ask you, a fraction question, you're gonna have a fraction answer, just figure out what the answers are with the fractions into numbers, like an example here. So that way you can pick out which one is the correct answer without ever having to use the fractions. Now let's go over the different areas of a shape and how to calculate that. First is a triangle, which is 1/2 of the base times the height. Next is a square, which is just s squared. So it's one side squared. So to calculate a circle, you have to do area equals pi radius squared. And then a rectangle, to find the area, is just length times width. Next is a stem and leaf plot. So an example, you might get age of students in the nursing program here. So you just have to find what the mean, the median, mode, and range is. So the mean is the average of the data points all together. You add all the data together and then divide by the amount of data. The median is the value in the middle of the data set. So you place the numbers in order from smallest to largest and cross out each end until you find what the answer is in the middle. The mode is the value that appears most often in the data set, and the range is the difference between the highest and lowest values in the data set. And finally, it's very important to memorize all these measurements and conversions for the math section of the teasexam. Let's go over the science section of the teasexam. This is the meat and potatoes of the exam. It is going to be 50 questions that you need to complete within 60 minutes or 1 hour. So let's talk about what's going to be included in the science section. There's going to be 50 total questions broken down into 18 that are anatomy and physiology, 9 are biology, 8 are chemistry, and 9 are scientific reasoning questions. So let's go over each of those topics now. So let's start with biology, which is the study of all living things, and that starts with a cell. A cell is a unit of all living things, and all cells contain RNA and DNA that synthesize proteins. There are 2 different main types of cells. There are prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryote, or before nucleus, is a unicellular organism. They're small, they have no membrane or nucleus. An example is bacteria. Versus a eukaryotic cell, this is a true nucleus. It is multicellular, it's large, has a membrane and a nucleus. Example of this would be plants and animals, including humans. So me and you, we are made up of eukaryotic cells. Just a reminder that cells grouped together are called tissues. Tissues that are grouped together are called organs, and then organs grouped together are called systems. Now, an organism is a complete individual. So let's talk about the parts of a cell. Okay, first we have the Golgi complex. I always think of this as like Amazon Prime. It sorts and delivers proteins out of the cell. So it's bringing all those goodies all over the body. And then there's the vacuoles that are like a vacuum that has a sac that sucks up digested products, stores them, and then removes waste. So vacuoles vacuum. There is the nucleus. This is the control center of the cell. A vesicle, like a vehicle, vesicle, vehicle. It moves materials inside a cell. So don't get that confused with like the Golgi complex. Golgi complex brings, it's Amazon Prime. It delivers outside of the cell, okay? Whereas vesicles are moving parts inside the cell. Moving those materials inside the cell. The forklifts inside Amazon Prime. But then there's the cytoskeleton, cytocell skeleton. It holds and helps maintain the shape of the cell. There's cytosol, which sounds like Lysol, which is a liquid. This is the liquid inside the cell. There's the cell membrane. This is the barrier that allows cytoplasm in and out of the cell. There's the endoplasmic reticulum. This synthesizes and transports proteins and lipids. So there are two types. There is the rough. The rough has ribosomes on the surface versus the smooth, there are no ribosomes. And what are even ribosomes, right? Ribosomes synthesize proteins from amino acids. They are located, again, on the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, it generates ATP, energy. It does cell signaling and cell differentiation. And one of the core concepts in biology is knowing mitosis and meiosis. Even what is mitosis? Mitosis is the stage of the cell cycle when the nucleus divides. All you have to remember for mitosis is PMAT, okay? I need you to remember P for prophase, M for metaphase, A for anaphase, and T for telophase. When you think of prophase, these are pairs, prophase pairs. Pairs of chromatin, which are DNA and proteins, bind together, while the meiotic spindle forms. Metaphase middle, remember metaphase middle, the M's, the spindle aligns the chromosomes along the center. Anaphase apart, the sister chromatids split at the center and pulled towards opposite poles. And telophase 2, now we have two daughter cells. And here are a couple extra differences between mitosis and meiosis, but the big thing is to remember is that in mitosis you do one round of PMAT, in meiosis you have 2 rounds, and because of that you're gonna have, instead of 2 daughter cells, you're gonna have 4 daughter cells. Now let's talk about histology. This is the study of tissues. We have 4 main types of tissues. We have nervous tissue. It is used for control and communication in the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. And then you have epithelial tissues. These cover and protect the surface of body and organs. So if they're flat, they're squamous. If they're cube, they're cuboidal. If they're long and thin, they're columnar. Think of epidermis, the surface of the skin. Epithelial, epidermis. Then you have connective tissues. These support, insulate, and transport substances and stores fluids and energy everywhere in the body. Muscle tissue is the last one. This helps the muscles of the body to move. So big topic in biology is learning RNA versus DNA. So let's go over everything you need to know. Chromosomes, what are they? They are made up of genes that are a single unit of genetic information. Okay, so DNA, which is also called deoxyribonucleic acid, it's a mouthful, makes up for genes that pass on genetic information. So DNA, genetic information. It has that double helix shape that has those 4 nitrogenous bases. So remember, they link up with adenine A, pairs up with thymine. Then guanine G pairs up with cytosine C. And then we have RNA, which is the ribonucleic acid, which is a helper of DNA. The big differences between DNA and RNA is that DNA stores and transmits genetic information versus RNA. What it primarily does is it converts that genetic information from the DNA into protein. DNA has those nitrogenous bases. We just went over the ATCG versus RNA has the A, U for uracil instead of the thymine, and then CG. So as I said, DNA has that genetic information, which has those genes. Genes are a portion of DNA that identifies how traits are expressed. Then there's genotype versus phenotype. Genotype is the genetics, the actual genetic code, like the GG, whatever. And then phenotype, I always think physical. Phenotype is the physical visual manifestations of a gene. So like brown hair, blue eyes. This here is an example of a Punnett square. This shows the different genotypes, so the genetic codes and what they represent for phenotypes. Let's talk about nutrition and macromolecules that are very important in all these biological processes that I'm talking about. One, just let's go over what are macromolecules. These are large molecules. These can be carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Carbohydrates are the primary source of energy that can be converted into sugars or glucose. So there are two types of simple sugars from carbs. One is monosaccharides. These are glucose, fructose, and galactose. Versus disaccharides, these are sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Lipids, on the other hand, are fats, phospholipids, steroids, and waxes used for energy storage and structural function. Also important to note, lipids do not mix well with water or watery solutions. Then proteins are macromolecules formed into amino acids, and nucleic acids, these are macromolecules made of nucleotides that store information or energy. A note with macromolecules is that when molecules come together or break apart, it's important to know these definitions. So anabolic, just remember the A's, anabolic, adding more molecules together to form macromolecules. Catabolic, I think of cats. They have these really cute little paws, but if you look underneath, there's these really big cat claws, and they like to break things apart, right? They can scratch furniture and all that and break it apart, even though they're so cute. So catabolic, they break down large molecules into smaller ones. And this also releases energy in the process. Now let's talk about infection. Here's the chain of infection. First, you're gonna start with the infectious agent. This could be a bacteria, virus, a parasite, and then you're gonna have where it lives. So it can live in a person, animal, soil, food, water. And you're gonna have the mode of transmission. This can be contact, droplet, airborne, or enteric. The portal of entry, which is also vomit, saliva, blood, feces, and the susceptible host. So these can be babies, children, elderly, and immunocompromised are most at risk. So let's talk about pathogens. So pathogens can be a bacteria, virus, fungi, or protozoa. So to classify bacteria, you can use these steps. One, is it gram-positive or gram-negative? Two, the taxonomic status. So this is going to be the genera and species of the bacterium. Three, is it anaerobic or aerobic? So does it require oxygen or not? Four is the usual environment. So where's the location they usually reside? And then finally, the virulence factor. Is it invasive or opportunistic? Now that we just talked about pathogens that try to attack the body, what does the body have to protect itself? So let's talk about the types of immunity. There are four main types of immunity. There is natural active, which is from the infection itself. So once you get infected, you're gonna build antibodies and immunity from that infection. The next is artificial active. So again, this is doing something, this is getting a vaccine to protect yourself against these different pathogens. The next one is natural passive. This is from usually breast milk. So a mother will offer those antibodies, that protection through her breast milk to her infant. Next is artificial passive. This is monoclonal antibodies. All right, right, and then let's talk about our defenses, our body's lines of defense. Okay, like football players, these are our lines of defense to keep infection away. Our first line of defense, this is the largest organ on the body as well, it is the skin. The skin, mucous membranes, secretions of the skin, so like sebum, these things are going to help protect you against infection and disease. The second line of defense is phagocytic antigen eating, leukocytes. And then there's antimicrobial proteins and the inflammatory response. This is going to be that heat, redness, pain, swelling that you're going to see once you get infected with something. Your body's going to react in that way to fight it off. And then let's talk about asepsis. So this is defined as being free of those pathogens we talked about, the bacteria, virus, fungi, protozoa. There is a difference between medical and surgical asepsis. Medical asepsis tries to limit the number of microorganisms versus surgical asepsis says we want to eliminate all microorganisms, okay? So those are the difference between medical versus surgical asepsis. So let's talk about chemistry, which is 8 of those 50 questions on the teasexam. So let's start with atoms. All matter consists of atoms. Each atom has protons, electrons, and neutrons. So if you guys remember, protons are positive, electrons are negative, and neutrons are neutral. They have no charge, electrical charge to it. The nucleus of an atom has protons and neutrons, while electrons are outside the nucleus. So on the periodic table, you're going to see these different elements. Just remember that up here is the atomic number. This is the number of those positively charged protons. And then down here is the atomic mass, or the mass number, the total number of protons plus neutrons in the nucleus of an atom. Because remember, those electrons stay outside the nucleus. So let's also talk about isotopes. Isotopes are elements with the same number of protons and electrons, but they have a different number of neutrons. So now let's review the different types of chemical bonds. Okay, first we have ionic bonding. This is when an atom becomes negatively or positively charged when gaining or losing electrons and turns into an ion. Covalent bonding is atoms that share electrons. A nonpolar bond is when electrons share equally. A polar bond is when they share unequally. Finally, hydrogen bonding. This is when a molecule's atoms interact with a hydrogen atom in the same area. So then let's talk about chemical reaction types. Here are the 4 main types. There is combination reaction, so that 2 or more reactants combine to form a single product. Decomposition reaction, a single reactant forms 2 or more products. A single replacement, so one element replaces another in a compound, or a double replacement, which is 2 compounds undergo a change of partners. Remember, an ion is just an atom or a group of atoms that have positive or negative electrical charges. But if it's a cation, it is a positive ion formed when electrons are lost. Anion is a negative ion formed when electrons are gained. Electrons are, again, those negatively charged. You get more of them, they become anions. Now let's talk about substance movement. This is actually incredibly important that you're gonna need to know for your first semester of nursing school too. So substances move through membranes either by diffusion, facilitated diffusion, or osmosis. So diffusion is when they move from areas of higher concentration to lower concentration. It doesn't require any energy. It can just move from the higher to lower without any help. Versus facilitated diffusion. This is molecules that are moved by a carrier protein. They need that help. And finally, osmosis is movement of water through a semi-permeable membrane from an area of lower concentration to higher concentration. Review matter and the elements of matter. This is a huge part of chemistry to know as well. So matter is substances that have mass and volume. This includes gas, a liquid, or a solid. Move on to mass. This is the measure of elasticity, volume, and temperature. Weight is the measure of the gravitational pull on an object, example in pounds or kilograms. Volume is the amount of space occupied, so volume equals length times width times height. Density is the measure of the amount of mass divided by the unit volume. And then specific gravity. So this is the ratio of a substance's density compared to water. So urine specific gravity is 1.005 to 1.030. All right, so this one is highly tested when it comes to chemistry. This is also highly tested in nursing school. It's acid and base balance. So let's go over everything you need to know for this. So pH is the measure of hydrogen ion concentration in a solution. So the scale ranges from 0 to 14. 7 is considered neutral. So when we talk about acids and bases, acids are substances that increase the concentration of hydrogen ions versus bases will decrease the concentration of hydrogen ions. Remember these acid-base disorders. I have a whole cheat sheet here that you can download on practicing them, how to do them, and what they actually mean, because there's the 4 types: respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, and metabolic alkalosis. All right, so let's go over anatomy and physiology, the 11 body systems. Remember that the A&P is 18 questions out of the 50 in the science section. Let's start with directional terms. When it comes to the body, medial is towards the middle, medial, middle. Lateral is away from the midline of the body. Proximal is the structure closer to the center of the body versus distal is further away from the center of the body. Anterior is front, posterior is behind, superior is above, inferior is below. All right, so let's start with the respiratory system. This includes the lungs, the pharynx, which is also the throat, the larynx, which is the voice box, the trachea, which is the windpipe, the large and small airways, and the nose and mouth. So the main function of the respiratory system is it supplies the body with oxygen, O2, and gets rid of carbon dioxide, which is CO2. It also filters, warms, and moistens air as it passes. So some key things to remember with the respiratory system is that hyperventilation is rapid breathing, which results in acidosis, versus hypoventilation is slow breathing that causes alkalosis. Ventilation is the process of moving air in and out of the lungs. With that is inspiration and expiration. Now, inspiration is where the thoracic cavity expands and the external intercostal muscles contract. The diaphragm flattens or contracts, versus expiration, when I blow out, the thoracic cavity reduces, the external intercostal muscles relax, and the diaphragm relaxes. There are 2 membranes of the lungs. There's the parietal pleura, which is the membrane that lines the thoracic cavity, and then there's the visceral pleura, which is the membrane that lines the surface of the lung. So the lungs have something called alveoli. These are these air sacs where gas exchange occurs. So again, gas exchange occurs in the alveoli, and oxygen diffuses from the alveoli into the blood. So it goes all over the body. Carbon dioxide diffuses from blood into the alveoli to be exhaled. So when oxygen is being transported out of the alveoli, the oxygen binds to something called hemoglobin that is in the red blood cells. So let's move on to the cardiovascular system. This includes the heart, blood, and blood vessels. The main function of the cardiovascular system is to transport substances, which is oxygen, nutrients, hormones, ions, and fluids to and from the cells. Now here is a picture of the heart. As you can see, the heart has 4 chambers. There's the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. There are 4 main valves, which are the tricuspid, pulmonary, mitral, or the bicuspid, and the aortic valve. In regards to blood vessels, now when I think of veins, I think of these veiny vampires. They suck everything dry. So these veiny vampires carry this deoxygenated blood to the heart to get oxygenated. So they carry it to the heart. And then arteries, I think of like an artistic person. They're just carrying all their supplies. They have all this beautiful oxygenated blood. They carry it away from the heart. Move on to blood pressure. Just a few basics that if you remember, systole is when the heart contracts, versus diastole is when the heart relaxes. And systolic pressure is the max pressure exerted during systole. There are 2 circulatory routes that you need to know. First is systemic. This circuit is oxygen-rich blood from the left ventricle and is distributed to the body's tissues, and it returns deoxygenated blood to the right atrium. Versus the pulmonary circuit, this is when there is deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle, which is sent to the lungs to pick up oxygen and release that carbon dioxide, and it returns that oxygenated blood to the left atrium. Let's talk about blood components. In blood, there is plasma. This is the liquid component of blood that carries nutrients, hormones, and waste products. There's red blood cells, erythrocytes. They carry oxygen using hemoglobin. There's white blood cells. These are leukocytes. They are part of the immune system that fight off disease and illness. And then there is platelets. These are thrombocytes, and these are involved in blood clotting. Let's really quickly go over electrocardiograms. You have your PQRST. So the P wave is when the atriums are contracting or depolarizing. And then the QRS complex is when the atriums are starting to relax while the ventricles are going to start to contract. And then there's the T wave. This is when everything kind of calms down to restart a new cycle. So now let's talk about the lymphatic system. This includes the lymph nodes, the spleen, the appendix, adenoids, thymus, tonsils, and parts of the small intestine. So what are the functions of the lymphatic system? First, it is immune system support. It returns excess fluid to blood, transports fats from the digestive tract, and disposes of cellular waste and debris. So let's go over the parts of the lymphatic system. So first we have the lymph nodes. These filter lymph of pathogens and activates lymphocytes. So just a reminder that lymph is that colorless fluid that contains white blood cells. The spleen, it stores lymphocytes as a site for the immune response, and it removes blood of dead cells and pathogens. The thymus, it develops immature T cells that are formed in the bone marrow. T cells, these are the T for tough. T cells, they will attack these pathogens. They are the Navy SEALs of the cells. They're going to command for the immune system to respond, and they are going to immune response come in. And then there's the tonsils. These protect against pathogens that enter through the mouth or throat. There's Peyer's patches. These destroy pathogens in the digestive system, and the red bone marrow, which develops B memory cells. B cells are these like really smart memory cells that remember how to destroy pathogens that have already that the body has already been exposed to. So these are B kind of memory cells. Now, what are the types of white blood cells? There is neutrophils. These are for acute bacterial infections. Lymphocytes, these are for viral infections or stress. Monocytes, these are, I think of mono. If you ever heard of mono, you get sick for a really long time. Think of chronic infections long term. Eosinophils, those are for parasitic worms. And then basophils, those are for an allergic reaction. So now let's go over the digestive system. This includes the mouth, which is used for mechanical reasons like mastication, chewing, and chemical digestion by enzymes like amylase, which breaks down carbs. You have the pharynx, which is the passageway for food and air. You have the esophagus, which carries food from the pharynx to the stomach. Stomach itself, this stores and mixes food. Small intestine, which is used for digestion and absorption of nutrients. The liver, which detoxifies harmful substances and produces bile to aid in digestion. You have the gallbladder, which stores and concentrates bile. You have the pancreas, produces the enzymes amylase, lipase, protease. You have the large intestine, which is the colon. This absorbs water, electrolytes, and vitamins. It also stores and compacts feces to be excreted. And finally, the rectum and anus. This is where feces will be expelled. Main function of the digestive system is to mix and pass nutrients while eliminating waste. It also is used to secrete enzymes used for digestion, to break down nutrients, again, using digestion into smaller units and absorbing those nutrients through the plasma membrane into the blood or lymph and then into the body. So let's go over how the digestive process works. First, you are going to ingest or eat something. So let's say that I'm eating my cake, and then all of a sudden my body's going to do something called propulsion. This is where you move food through the GI tract through peristalsis, like just a contraction of the GI tract. As my body's moving that cake down, it's using also mechanical digestion next. This is physically breaking down the food by masticating, chewing. Now that the food is breaking down, it's gonna use chemicals with chemical digestion to break down those foods even further with enzymes. As my food is breaking down, the next thing is absorption. So the food is going to be transported and digested from the GI lumen into the blood and lymph. So even though I'm eating this cake, some of these nutrients that I had with it, like that sugar that's gonna give me energy, some of that carbs as well, like those things are gonna be absorbed, these nutrients, because my body needs them too. It's not all gonna be excreted. And then finally, whatever is left over, any extra waste, the final step of the digestive process is defecation. There goes my cake. Okay, so let's move on to the nervous system. This includes the brain and the spinal cord. The main function of the nervous system is to interpret sensory and motor impulses and issue commands as neurons, aka info messengers. So as you see with the brain, you have the frontal lobe. This is with decision making, planning, judgment, short-term memory, information processing. Then there's the parietal lobe. This is for spatial positioning and senses like temp or pain. The occipital lobe, which is vision. The temporal lobe, which is hearing, long-term memory, and smell. Then you have the cerebellum, which is used for balance and posture. The brainstem, the midbrain, is for vision and hearing. You have the pons, which is sleep, and the medulla oblongata, which is heart rate, respiratory rate, consciousness. More with the brain on the right side, I consider that art. The artsy side, this is where you're going to have creativity, problem solving, spatial perception. On the left side, remember left logic, so this is going to be speech, math, writing, and logical processes. And finally, the spinal cord. This is what transmits signals between the brain and the rest of the body and coordinates reflexes. The system is broken down into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So the central nervous system, as I said, it has the brain and the spinal cord, versus the peripheral nervous system can be further broken down into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So the somatic nervous system is going to control voluntary movements by activating skeletal muscles, versus the autonomic nervous system controls the involuntary functions like heart rate, digestion, respiratory rate. Also further be broken down into the sympathetic and parasympathetic division. So sympathetic, I want you to think fight or flight. This is what happens when you like see a bear, you know, your sympathetic nervous system's going off, versus with the parasympathetic, I want you to think of rest and digest. This is when you are sitting on the couch watching Netflix, eating chips, your heart rate, blood pressure is gonna decrease, your GI motility increases though. Important to know about neurotransmitters in the nervous system. Neurotransmitters are just these chemicals released at synapses that transmit signals between neurons. So an example of that is like GABA, which is calming, serotonin, which is for your mood, adrenaline, which is that fight or flight. These are examples of neurotransmitters. Talk about the muscular system now. This includes the skeletal, the smooth, and the cardiac muscle. The main function of the muscular system is for movement, circulation, joint stabilization, and even thermal regulation. So let's break down the different muscle types. There is skeletal muscle. This is a voluntary muscle that moves the skeleton, so you tell it to move, okay? Versus smooth muscle. This is involuntary muscles on the walls of internal organs. We do not have control over this. It's gonna move the muscles itself. Finally, cardiac muscle. Again, this is involuntary. I can't tell myself how fast or slow for my heart to beat. This cardiac muscle is involuntary muscles found only in the heart. Here's the structure of muscle. You'll see the muscle fibers. They're long cylindrical cells that make up the skeletal muscles. There's here the myofibrils. They're like thread-like structures within the muscle fibers. These are made up of what's called sarcomeres. Sarcomeres are the functional units of muscle contraction. They're made up of actin and myosin, so they really help your muscles contract. And finally, you have your tendons. This is connective tissue that attaches muscle to bone. Talk about the reproductive system. This is used to reproduce offspring. What is included in the male reproductive system? First, we have the testes. These produce the sperm. Then there's the epididymis. This stores and matures sperm. So I think of sperm as like these little kids, right? And they go into the school. The epididymis is the school that keeps them in house and kind of helps them until they grow up. You have the vas deferens, which is like the school bus. This transports the sperm to the urethra for ejaculation. You have the seminal vesicles. This produces seminal fluid, which is energy for the sperm. Prostate gland. This produces also fluid that nourishes the sperm. You have the bulbourethral glands. This is a fluid that lubricates the urethra. And the urethra transports semen out of the body via the penis. And finally, the penis delivers sperm into female genitalia. And it's also used for, you know, sexual acts. The female reproductive system, on the other hand, this includes the ovaries, which produces eggs, ova, and hormones. There is also the fallopian tubes. This transports the eggs to the uterus, which is the site of fertilization. You have the uterus, which houses and nourishes the fetus. This is the really comfy home that the fetus lives in. And then you have the cervix, which is the lower part of the uterus that opens the vagina. Then you have the vagina, or as my daughter calls it, the vagina, that receives sperm during intercourse, and it's also the birth canal. And then you finally have the vulva. This protects internal reproductive organs. There are quite a few hormones that are involved in the reproductive system, so I'm just going to go over the top ones that I think you should know. Number one is estrogen. This develops sexual characteristics, aka like breasts, and it regulates the menstrual cycle. 2 is progesterone. This maintains the endometrium for pregnancy. The next one is the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. This matures ovarian follicles. You have the luteinizing hormone, LH. This triggers ovulation. The HCG hormone, this is the pregnancy hormone. This is what they test to see, if a patient is pregnant. You have the GnRH. This regulates the timing of the menstrual cycle. Lactin, this stimulates breast milk production. And finally, the last hormone to know is testosterone. This is the main male hormone that is used to develop sex characteristics like chest hair and spermatogenesis, which is the process of producing sperm. The last big part I think you should know for the reproductive system with the T's is the female reproductive cycle. There are 4 phases in the female reproductive cycle. The first phase is the follicular phase. This is where FSH, follicle stimulating hormones, develop and estrogen increases. Then second is the ovulation phase. This is when there is a release of an egg from the ovary. 3 is the luteal phase. This is when either A, you can have the fertilization of the ovum, aka that results in pregnancy, or the menstrual cycle renews. And then finally, for the menstrual phase, this is when the endometrium is shed and bleeding occurs. Now let's review the integumentary system. So the function of the integumentary system is to protect against infection, produce vitamin D, secrete waste and fluid, and communicates with sensory and motor neurons. So let's go over what's included in the integumentary system. First is the epidermis. This is the outer layer of skin for protection. Just remember there are those layers in the epidermis, so you can remember Cher likes getting skin Botox. Stratum corneum, lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and basal. After the epidermis, which is the outer layer of the skin, you have the dermis. This is the middle layer. It provides strength and elasticity, and it contains hair follicles, sweat glands, and blood vessels. So the dermis has a papillary layer, which is the upper layer, and a reticular layer, which is the lower layer. After the dermis, you're gonna have the hypodermis. This is usually composed of adipose tissue, so fatty tissue that insulates the body, provides padding, and stores energy. Next, we have the sebaceous glands. This produces sebum, an oily substance that lubricates the hair and skin. I think Pantene should rename themselves sebum. I don't know. Then you have the sweat glands. These are used for thermoregulation and excretion. You have the 2, which is the eccrine sweat glands. This is watery sweat throughout the skin. And then you have the apocrine sweat glands. This is thicker sweat with odor in the armpits and groin. You have the hair next. This is made of keratin. It provides protection, regulates body temp, and facilitates the sensation of touch. And then you have your nails, which protects the tips of fingers and toes. So it's really easy actually to remember the functions of the skin. You can just remember it with the word bliss. B for balance of temperature, L for loss of moisture, I for infection and injury protection, S for synthesis of vitamin D, and S for sensation, touch, and temp. Next, we have the endocrine system. This is primarily used to produce hormones that help regulate and maintain homeostasis in the body. The endocrine system includes the adrenal glands, which includes adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla, the hypothalamus, which regulates hunger, thirst, sleep, and temp, the pituitary gland, you have the anterior and posterior, the pineal gland, this is with producing melatonin, sleep, the thyroid gland regulates metabolism and calcium levels, the parathyroid gland regulates calcium and phosphate balance, the pancreas, which controls blood sugar levels, the gonads, the testes and ovaries, finally the thymus, the immune response. Important to know some of these top tested hormones. I have a whole list in my T's notes. Now let's talk about the urinary system. So the main function of the urinary system is to remove waste and medicines, balance body fluids, control blood pressure levels, and filters blood. This includes the kidneys, these little bean-shaped organs that are used to filter blood, to remove waste, and produce urine. But you have the ureters. These transport urine from the kidneys to the bladder. You have the bladder, which stores urine. And finally, the urethra, which conducts urine from the bladder to outside of the body. The main hormone to know with the urinary system is the antidiuretic hormone, ADH. This increases water reabsorption by the kidneys. You have aldosterone. This increases sodium reabsorption. So remember that water follows salt. So if sodium is being reabsorbed by the body, we want to keep the sodium. That means water is going to rise too, because the water wants to stay with the sodium. So aldosterone is used to reabsorb sodium and fluid levels. You have the RAS system, which is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. This is used to increase blood pressure. And then you have the atrial natriuretic peptide. This increases urine production and reduces blood volume and pressure. Finally, there is a really easy way to remember all the functions of the kidney. You can just remember it with the phrase, a wet bed. A for acid-base balance, W for water balance, E for electrolyte balance, T for toxin removal, B for blood pressure control, E for erythropoietin production, and D for vitamin D metabolism. Now let's review the skeletal system. This provides protection for internal organs, it supports the human body structure, it does red blood cell production, and it helps move bones with the skeletal muscle. The skeletal system includes bones, cartilage, ligaments, and tendons. Let's review bones first. Bones provide structure, protect organs, anchors muscles, and stores calcium. There are different types of bones. There is long bones found in arms and legs, short bones found in wrists and ankles, flat bones that protect internal organs, irregular bones, they have complex shapes like vertebrae, sesamoid bones embedded within tendons. And then we have something called cartilage. Cartilage is this flexible support and reduces friction between bones. You have hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. Then we have ligaments. Ligaments connect bones to other bones and provide stability to joints versus tendons. Tendons connect muscles to bones. Talk about these bones. In these bones, we have these cells called osteoblasts. I always remember blasts because, these people are blasting off to create new bones versus osteoclasts. Osteoclasts are involved in bone resorption and remodeling. And then finally, there's osteocytes. These are mature bone cells that maintain bone tissue. Let's finally go over the English and language usage section. So this section is going to have 37 questions that you have to complete in 37 minutes. Here are the main spelling rules that you should remember for the T's. 1, keep Y if it is after a vowel, so that A-E-I-O-U, example would be the word pay. After the A, keep that Y. If the word ends in a consonant and a Y, change the Y to I. An example would be bully becomes bullied. Remember I before E except after C. So this is an example with believe, the word believe. Nouns ending in F or FE are pluralized by replacing F with V and ES. Example, woof would become wolves. Nouns ending in a consonant and O are pluralized by adding ES. Example would be hero would become heroes, and then nouns ending in a vowel and an O are pluralized by adding S. So an example would pianos would become pianos. Let's talk about the parts of speech. 1 is a common noun. This is the name of a general place, person, or thing. So it's not capitalized. So the person would be a girl, a boy, a teacher. The place would be a school, a home, a library, or the thing can be a car or a shoe. Number 2 is proper nouns. So these are names of a specific person, place, or thing. So these are capitalized, okay? Whereas common nouns, not capitalized. Proper nouns, they are proper. They need to be capitalized. They're important. So a person would be like Nancy Drew. That is a specific name. The place could be like Harvard, New York, California. Those are specific. Or for a thing like the Statue of Liberty, that is capitalized. Collective nouns are names that may encompass multiple people, places, or things as a whole. So an example would be a dozen, a herd, a team. And a compound noun, this is a noun that combines two or more words. So an example would be mother-in-law. So then there are pronouns. These are words that are used to substitute for a noun. Here is a whole list of pronouns from my tease notes. Then there is an adjective. An adjective is used to describe or modify a noun. So an example was her handwriting was beautiful. And then finally there's a verb. This is an action. So an example would be to study, run, get, to invite. These are all actions that one would do. There are quite a few different types of verbs or actions, so let's go over them. There is a present verb, so this is an action that is happening right now. An example is, right now you are studying for school. A past verb is an action that happened in the past. So example is that you studied for the tease exam 2 days ago. Okay, and then there's a future verb, so this is an action that is going to happen in the future. So it's going to be like, you are going to study on Saturday. And then present perfect is going to be an action that started in the past and continued into the present. So an example is, I have studied for this exam 3 times today. And then there's a past perfect. So this is where the second action happened in the past and the first action came before the second. So an example would be, before I studied for class, I had bought an iced coffee at Starbucks. So then future present, the action is done before a future moment. An example is, when she is ready to graduate as a nurse, she will have studied for over 1,000 hours. All right, now let's go over the different types of punctuation. First, you're gonna see a period that is used to end a sentence. Next is a question mark. This is used following a question. There is an exclamation. This is used to show feeling or importance. Okay, and then there's commas. So these can be used to connect independent clauses after an introduction between items in a series, contrasting two items or dates and addresses. A semicolon is used to connect 2 sentences together. Example would be, the nurse started labs on the patient. However, the patient wants to leave against medical advice, AMA. And then parentheses, they are used as labels for letters or numbers in a series. Example, the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. Then we have quotation marks. These are used for a person speaking or having written words. An example, the instructor said, you need to read the 2nd chapter for this exam. Apostrophes, these are used to show possession. So example would be, Clara's spirometer helped her prevent pneumonia. A hyphen, it is used to combine compound words in between numbers 21 to 99. And then finally there's capitalization. It's used at the beginning of a sentence, proper nouns, adjectives from proper nouns, or the title of published work. So let's talk about point of view. So if you are first person, that is yourself talking, that would be I, my, we, our. So it's self, right, is first person. Second person is the other person talking. So this would be you, your, or yours. Third person is going to be like an outsider talking about you or the person you're with, right? So this is an outsider. So third person would be he, she, it, they. Let's talk about homophones. Homophones are words pronounced the same way but spelled differently. These can be kind of tricky. Example is bear, bear, right? They have the same sound, but they actually mean incredibly different things. Important, make sure you pick the right word that has the right meaning for the context that you're reading. And then let's talk about effect versus effect. A lot of people struggle with this. Effect means to influence versus effect means to bring something about. So, for example, effect, her breakup affected her decision to attend nursing school. So her breakup affected or influenced her decision to apply to nursing school to pursue her dream. This effect, it's like the aftermath of bringing something about. So an example of this would be the medication had positive effects on the patient. Okay, let's talk about its and its. So its is a pronoun showing ownership versus its is a combination of it is. There, and there. There is used to show a place or start a sentence. There is a pronoun that shows ownership. And then finally, there is a contraction or a combination of the words they are. To, and to can also be a very tricky one. So to is an adverb or a proposition for showing direction, purpose, or a relationship. To is an adverb that means also, as well, very. And then finally, two is the second number in a series of numbers. Your and your. So the first one, your, is an adjective that shows ownership. So an example would be, your idea to become a nurse is a great one. Versus your is a contraction of you are, meaning you're going to be a great nurse. You are. Hi everyone, I really hope this helped you guys in some way. If it did, please write me a message in the comments. It means the world to me. If there's anything else I can do, also let me know. I wish you all the best of luck on the teasexam. The world really needs more nurses, so I'm very excited that you're starting this journey, and I wish you all the best of luck. All right, love you guys. Bye.